Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be getting into episodes 447 through 449, which will cover manga chapters 544 through 546. And it is Luffy versus Blackbeard, which is a huge deal, but it's hardly the most significant thing in this jam-packed set of episodes. So, let's get into the synopsis. Luffy, having run into the man that is the source of all of this trouble, has to find a way to move past Blackbeard in order to continue forward and escape Impel Down to reach Ace. However, they need to lay it all out on the table to push past all the crazy defense forces of the Impel Down, as well as the ever-looming unstoppable force of Magellan. So, differences. There are only a couple differences in this set of episodes. The first being, in the anime, it's shown that Luffy defeats the Minotaurs a second time, but in the manga, the scene never actually happens. The scene actually just ends when Blackbeard is laughing maniacally and after declaring that he's got a world-shaking show that he's about to perform in a few hours. And so, yeah, in the manga, it's never really established how everyone got past the Minotaurs, so I think this was actually a good change that they actually included how they defeated the Minotaurs the second time. And the next change that they made was they added a couple more scenes with Ivankov and Magellan's fight, just to kind of extend it and round it out a little bit. And then lastly, in the anime, we actually get to see Galdino build the candle champion armor for Luffy. And yeah, in the manga, it's Luffy just says he has an idea, and then it smash cuts in the next page to Luffy already having the armor or I guess the gloves and the boots. But in the anime, they go through this long sort of mecha suit-up scene for this reveal, which I think, again, is another great change. So overall, I really actually like the inclusions done here. And then obviously there are a couple scenes that are kind of shifted around throughout the episode, but that's really not a big deal. That's mostly done for flow and pacing. So yeah, let's get into my thoughts on these episodes, and we are finally here as we get to see Luffy take on Blackbeard. Luffy's jet pistol clearly hurts him, but it's not long before the horrifying nature of Blackbeard's yummy powers as they show up, and Luffy draws blood from a blunt attack from his devil fruit being nullified. However, Luffy, consumed and blinded by anger, he just keeps pushing ahead, but cooler heads prevail as Jinbei steps in to stop Luffy from going on a needless rampage against Blackbeard when his real mission is to save Ace, not to get revenge. While it's disappointing that we don't get to see more of this encounter between Blackbeard and Luffy, I really love Jinbei here, and it's not going to be any surprise because I'm going to be gushing about Jinbei during this podcast because he's freaking awesome. But it's no secret by now, that I really like him as a character, and he just has this sort of honorable and kind aura about him, and the way he guides Luffy and protects him. It's really an amazing dynamic that they have, and that we'll see continue on as the arc carries on. And Jinbei is sort of like the wise old sage that's there to guide Luffy. And right now, without his nakama, Luffy really needs someone like Jinbei to not only physically help him in combat as support, but also be there to provide a level head and counsel. One other thing I found really interesting about this scene that I had completely forgotten about till this rewatch was that Blackbeard mentions how much stronger Luffy's haki has gotten since their last meeting, which obviously means that Luffy had his Conqueror's haki already even as far back as Jaya, and perhaps he may have even had it even further back than that, maybe even as a kid, which is why, Shanks took such an interest in Luffy, is that he could sense Luffy's Conqueror's haki. But yeah, it's just something that kind of crossed my mind. I don't think it's ever been sort of confirmed that was the case, but that's just kind of my reading of that situation now. Or at least that's my own headcanon. The episode takes its time reminding us that despite Blackbeard being a villain, still has that same unshakable belief in himself and sort of his dreams, just as Luffy does, but in a very twisted and perverted way, as he almost rhetorically asks him, the Sky Island was there, right? And as though he knew it was there the whole time, kind of reinforcing that idea that was created all the way back in Jaya, that Blackbeard and Luffy are inextricably linked as sort of a dark mirror of Luffy. And this moment with this being, further reinforced by Luffy taking a long time studying Blackbeard as he walks away, declaring that he's got some big show that will shake the world up his sleeve. And at the time, I remember being intrigued by this moment, but in retrospect, rewatching this now, after knowing what Blackbeard goes on to become, this scene is far more ominous than I had ever imagined. It sort of retroactively gives me chills. Another interesting addition to the lore of One Piece is added in this episode as well, when we see the rest of the New Kama Land people rush up the stairs only to be stopped by a reawakened Minotauros, with Crocodile dropping a key line here. He remarks that it makes sense that the Minotauros is awake so quickly after being beaten, and that is because it's awakened its Zone Devil Fruit, and it makes them far more resilient, tougher, and stronger. Now, this is a very interesting new development in the lore of Devil Fruits. The concept that Devil Fruits can somehow be enhanced by awakening them, as if to say there are ways to power up the powers of a Devil Fruit. Now, this begs the question, can fruits apart from zone types be awakened? Like, what would an awakened Paramecia or Logia fruit be like? Do they become more powerful versions, or maybe even unlock hidden sets of abilities? Only time will tell. And yeah, I'll discuss this a bit in the spoiler section for sure. But one other thing to note, and I mentioned this tiny bit in the spoiler section during the NES lobby arc, but you notice something very familiar about these zone types to another zone that underwent this very similar kind of transformation, and that of course am talking about Monster Point Chopper. Now, I don't think it's ever been confirmed, but I believe that Monster Point Chopper may have actually been the first awakened Devil Fruit that we ever see, because Chopper also becomes an incredibly strong, huge, tough, mindless beast, in addition, very similar to these dungeon beasts. The only real difference being is that Chopper's is obviously temporary and artificially induced, which may be why Monster Point Chopper is far more uncontrollable and wild, but that's never really been confirmed, and it's just a theory in my head. But that's something I've always kind of thought, and I think it's right. But in any case, it will be very interesting to see how one awakens a fruit and which ones can be awakened, or I'm assuming all of them can be. It's just depending on what, how much work the person puts in to awaken them. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to see like what awakened Devil Fruits would be like. Now, obviously, in hindsight, I've seen more throughout the series. But yeah, it was pretty crazy to realize this fact at the time. One scene I was surprised that they completely left in was showing Sadie all bound up in sort of that sexual bondage style. I thought for sure that they would censor that out, but I guess not. In the same scene, we get a great moment showing what kind of guy Magellan is, and this actually made me feel quite a bit of sympathy for Magellan, which is impressive. He clearly cares for his subordinates, and even though Hannibal up to this point has shown nothing but contempt and even outward displays of insubordination by declaring that he wants Magellan's job and is like actively sabotaging him, Magellan recognizes and respects Hannibal and actually does consider him to be his successor, which I actually found pretty sweet. And I really felt bad for Magellan here. Here's this guy who seems to be a fairly good and honorable dude, just trying to do his job of keeping the most dangerous people in the world locked up, but now all that is going to shit because some punk kid showed up and just caused chaos everywhere. It's always interesting, exercise looking at the Straw Hats' action from the point of view of people, that are outside, that are in the inner circle of the Straw Hats, whether that's your typical Marine, and I don't mean like the corrupt and powerful Marines, but just like your average Joe soldier who enlists in the Marines, hoping to do some good in the world, or an average citizen who has no idea of what the true context of the conflict going on, and just seeing the Straw Hats as maybe even terrorists, you do start to see why most people fear pirates, and even the so-called good ones like Luffy. It really kind of skews how you view them, and I think I like that Oda kind of lets you see the perspective from the other side. Because, yeah, not everyone is an evil villain. They're just antagonists that are trying to compete against the Strong Hats because they have competing values or competing goals, but they're not necessarily evil. Now, going back to Magellan, though, like I mentioned a few podcasts back, he is so OP. It's insane, as he yet again displays his immense power by literally one-shotting Blackbeard, not just Blackbeard, but his entire crew with his poison hydras before any of them can realize what actually hit them. And this then sets up the overwhelming, unbalanced fight between Ivankov and Magellan, with Inazuma cutting the stairwell up and leaving Ivankov to buy the rest of them some time. Seeing this matchup, my immediate thought was Ivankov is going to lose this fight for sure. But I felt like, they were too big of a character to basically disappear from the story. So the whole time I was left thinking, how is Ivankov going to get out of this with the only way out now cut off? Although the outcome of this fight is kind of spoiled in the current opening, I love the scene where Ivankov is like screaming in agony from being covered in Magellan's poison, but then fakes everyone out by ripping their makeup face off. And Magellan's kind of like blank stare while watching this was pretty amusing as well. Like, how much freaking makeup were they wearing for it to form a solid layer over their face enough to protect them from that poison? Also, another thing about Ivankov is the Queen Kempo finishing move, the 44 aesthetic technique, the hair removal fist, is just hilarious. Like, especially in Japanese, this is when it's translated literally, it's named unnecessary hair removal fist, but it can also apparently be translated as hair waxing fist as well, which no matter how you translate this move's name is ridiculous, and I love it. We don't get to see the attack, unfortunately, land because it cuts to black just then, and then we see Inazuma waiting, but instead of Ivankov emerging victorious, to Inazuma's dismay, it's Magellan instead, as we see Ivankov on the ground covered in poison. Magellan is just, like I said, OP, and I don't know how you beat this guy unless you have one of the Admiral's devil fruits. Like, maybe Aokichi could, like, freeze him, or Kizaru can, like, just blast through the poison. But, yeah, I honestly do not know how you beat this guy. Anyways, as Luffy and company make it to level 2, they're met with a level that is already essentially controlled by Buggy, as he continues to gain influence and followers due to his quote-unquote generous actions, freeing everyone from their cells. And now they all feel indebted to Captain Buggy, which is, this whole storyline is incredible. And this is where I feel like Buggy's character goes from sort of like a fringe level comedic relief to a legit player that I have become truly invested in and want to see what this guy is going to do next, because it's so damn funny seeing this man way out of his depth continuing to fail upwards due to amazing fortune. And that great fortune continues to bless him and Galdino as they're saved by Jinbei and Luffy from the Demon Beast guards. And there are two things about this scene that I love so much. First off, it's the amazing aspect of Impel Down with the reunions and unusual meetings. And we get both, as Galdino is scared shitless running into Crocodile once again, especially after the last time they pretty much saw each other was when he tried to kill him. And, well, I guess technically they met very briefly during Miss Golden Week's cover story, just as they were being transported to what we would later find out is Impel Down. Then we get Buggy freaking out meeting Crocodile, which is something I never imagined seeing, especially throughout the first 100+ episodes of the series. And it's just one wave of nostalgia after the other, and it's so entertaining. I think, again, this is one aspect of following One Piece that is a bit diminished when you binge watch One Piece nowadays, because you don't get that large real-life time gap. And don't get me wrong, the nostalgia feeling is still there, since you're still experiencing a large gap in the story. But if you binge One Piece up to this point, you could easily get here, even if you weren't even binging like crazy, probably in under a year, which certainly doesn't have that same nostalgic feeling compared to what you would have experienced, which was about 10+ years by this point in the story. Not to say that, I'm not trying to say like, oh, I had a better experience because I followed this week to week, but it's just, I do think it is different though. I'm not saying one's better than the, well, I guess I am saying the one is better. But certainly binging One Piece has its benefits because of the pacing issues with One Piece. Being able to just like blast through episodes one after the other is actually nice compared to having to basically only get 15 minutes of real content per episode per week, which is annoying. But anyways, that's a whole nother story. But to circle back around, the second aspect that I love about this scene is just Luffy's innocent, genuine kindness and sort of the relief that he has that Buggy and Galdino are still okay. And the visual gag of Luffy's kind words literally stabbing the two in the chest is hilarious. And I genuinely think that Luffy showing them kindness and compassion does have an effect on them, even if it's not quite as apparent. Because while you can call it Oda just writing them this way, you see them not quite as vicious and villainous as they used to be. You don't see them just randomly lashing out at people beneath them like they used to. They're still bad guys, but they're not outright evil like they used to be. We see this play into Galdino, especially just minutes later when he lets these sort of good vibes get to him as he stays behind to protect Luffy and everyone else from Magellan's attack, playing the hero for the first time. And you can even see that in his interaction with Luffy, which has changed him, and he's kind of resisting it at first when it's seen that he's a bit strained and in denial that he for a moment considered Luffy a friend. Like seriously, like what amazing fun and character development writing here. And we'll get back to this moment a little later, but first, while Luffy may have already forgiven them, the two do get their comeuppance still when Boncré arrives to smack them around a bit for abandoning them. Plus, this entrance is amazing, especially how it's announced with one of the inmates yelling out to Buggy that the other level 2 inmates have arrived, but they're also accompanied by perverts with them. And Buggy's shocked response at the nonsense he's hearing with the perverts too. What the hell is this? As if he can't even comprehend what that even means. And yeah, if I heard that with no context, I'd be pretty confused as hell too. But then in typical Oda fashion, we get this complete tonal whiplash when Magellan catches up to everyone and things go from light and comedic to grim and terrifying, as we see that Ivankov and Inazuma were both defeated and left in puddles of poison. Luffy, losing sight of the bigger picture yet again due to his rage, needs to be stopped by both Boncré and Jinbei. It's really interesting how Oda, over the last couple arcs, has really turned this aspect of Luffy's character on its head. What was once one of Luffy's coolest traits, where he just charges in without a thought into any challenge, and we all collectively loved it when Luffy would declare that he's going to beat down someone's ass and just head straight for them. And before that was great when Luffy was the stronger one while the enemies were the weaker ones, as they were just kind of underestimating Luffy. However, now that Luffy is coming up against enemies that are not just stronger than him, but just on a completely different level, to the point where he just stands no chance, and charging in like he does is not only stupid, but selfish and incredibly dangerous to those around him, as we've seen already. And Oda has clearly been breaking Luffy down and sending him to these lows that we've not seen yet in the series, but it also does something that's often overlooked in One Piece that other battle shonen series fall into. And Oda has had the foresight to create a world that is so fleshed out that one issue that constantly plagues many other series that Oda manages to sidestep for the most part, and that is the issue of escalation. One Piece is obviously not immune to it, and it's definitely not perfect at handling this, because any series that runs for 25 plus years and 1,000 plus episodes will eventually run into this, but for the most part, I've never really taken issue with it as much as I have with some of the other series. And what I mean by this escalation issue is that often, a long-running battle series will have a set world with different threats that the heroes will have to overcome, but when the series needs to continue after that, after facing all these ever-escalating threats, they eventually get to a point where they meet a threat that's like world-ending or galaxy-ending type threats. It's like, well, where do you go from there? And they inevitably have to introduce an even bigger threat that comes out of nowhere in order to escalate the tension. But then it starts to feel like these things are being pulled out of nowhere, and you start wondering where these threats were up till now. And it starts to sort of creep in your mind all these sort of continuity and logistical conundrums about the series. And again, I'm not saying One Piece is perfect, because it's not. it certainly has some issues with escalation, but not nearly to the point of like series like Dragon Ball. And I, for the most part, I love all these series I'm about to sort of shit on a little bit. Like, I am a huge fan of all of them, so don't get me wrong. But I don't think it's a stretch to sort of admit these aspects about these series. But yeah, like Dragon Ball, especially with the introduction of Dragon Ball Super, is particularly prone to this. Naruto, towards the end, for sure, in its final arc, it really dealt with this. Bleach, particularly, I felt like Kubo was just pulling things out of his ass over and over. And yeah, they were cool stuff. And I love Bleach, but God, I constantly found myself remarking, in my head, where did this come from? And another thing, this is an anime, but a great example is the current MCU. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is having this very issue majorly post Thanos and Endgame. And so yeah, you have these stories in order to keep the story going past a certain point. They have this massive task of outdoing these universal level threats. And particularly with the MCU, with Thanos, they now have to go beyond the universal threat to a multiversal threat that again just seems to be coming out of nowhere much of the time. And Oda with One Piece, though, has been very careful about creating a world where it's already established that there are threats in the world like Mihawk, the Admirals, Kuma, and now Magellan that are far beyond what Luffy has faced, giving himself room to grow. So when he does approach the latter portions of the story, it doesn't feel like these immensely powerful threats, they just come out of nowhere. And in fact, some of them have been building since the very beginning of the series, which is pretty amazing that Oda has the foresight to build in a back door, basically, for his escalation issues that he might run into later on. Anyways, that whole side tangent aside, back to the main story, Magellan is basically portrayed as like this almost horror movie villain level unstoppable force that everyone has to run from. And it's awesome because we've never had a villain quite characterized like this. Of course, Kuma, Aokiji, Kizaru were unbeatable, but they never were this sort of, constantly pursuing force and running from them in sort of this enclosed space. They were more just simply overwhelming one-off battles. So when Galdino steps up to block Magellan's attack, it was pretty epic to see his character grow to a point where, again, he just kind of becomes a hero for a second there. And seeing this, Luffy has an idea, again, showcasing his insane battle genius and crazy imaginative ways of solving problems. And there's one thing that I don't like that they slightly changed in this scene, though. And this is particularly with how Crocodile reacts to this moment with Galdino. So in the anime, he seems just kind of mildly amused and even adds in an extra line that's not in the manga about how even trash can find their uses. But in the manga, he just talks about how you never know the different interactions between powers, and says it with a slight smile, almost as if he thinks he may have misjudged Galdino and is even slightly impressed. But the anime, for some reason, this nuance is almost completely erased, as he's not even really smiling and delivers this line almost with like the connotation of reluctance, as if he's like begrudgingly saying this, which I feel like they're two different things, and I think I prefer the manga version for this one. Now, I didn't list this in the differences section because it's just so subtle. But I wanted to mention that here because I like the manga version better, at least sort of the connotation that you get from it. Now, this scene does lead to an interaction that always gets a good chuckle out of me, is when Luffy is all geared up to actually fight off Magellan when Galdino, all he wants to do is just buy time and get the fuck out of there. The reaction to Luffy suggesting that they stay and fight is hilarious, especially the part where Galdino is all freaking out, but Luffy is just dead set and not listening to him whatsoever while Galdino's eyes are like bulging out of his face. It's so funny. And then we get the awesome mech suit up scene for the Candle Champion armor, calling back to two different scenes. One from all the way back in Little Garden when Galdino basically used a very similar Candle Champion mech suit to fight Luffy, as well as earlier in the arc where Luffy used the candle-encased fist to beat the Minotauros. However, Magellan is still not gonna go down that easy. Now, once we catch up with everyone else, they get to the surface and finally make it out of Impel Down, but they're met with the grim reality that the Marines aren't stupid and they just moved all the ships away from Impel Down so that they can't capture one and escape with it. But this is where Jinbei really shines and just shows how powerful he is and why he is a Shichibukai, as well as a Shichibukai level fishman. And it's freaking insane. He makes Arlong look like a child in comparison. And similarly, Kurobi, who was all about the powerful fishman karate techniques, not only is Jinbei skilled at the karate, but we also see him introduce fishman jujitsu when we see him perform the Water Heart Sea Current shoulder throw, which is a mouthful. And particularly with how he uses fisherman jujitsu, I love how in the manga particularly, it looks like he's ripping the water apart and throwing it. And you don't get quite this effect in the anime, but it's really cool if you ever see, especially the colorized version. The digital colorized versions of this scene are really cool. So if you ever get a chance to see that, check it out. It's in volume 55. But yeah, Jinbei is so awesome. I freaking love how cool this character is right from the get-go. And the last thing I wanted to mention, because it's hilarious, is that Buggy continues to shine as well. You'd think his shtick of faking it till you make it and getting obnoxiously freaked out would get old, but it doesn't. And I think it's because Buggy is smartly always paired up with a comedic straight man that kind of evens him out. I mean, for a while it was Alvida, and then we had Gaudino during the beginning part of Impel Down, and now he's with the two most serious people in Crocodile and Das Bonus. And so, for example, like that scene of him freaking out that Jinbei betrayed and abandoned them is so funny because Das Bonus is there just to straight up ask him, why did you even come? I don't know why, that scene is so funny. But Buggy is becoming seriously one of the best characters in the series, and I understand why Oda loves Buggy and why Buggy is his favorite character. But yeah, with that, we're inching ever closer to the escape of Impel Down, but there are still a lot of hurdles to get past before they're in the clear and can head off to Marineford to hopefully catch up to Ace. But that's where we'll end it here. And yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and X account at SunnyGo Podcast for updates of when I post new episodes, as well as see pictures of my manga collection. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. I'm going to have a very tiny spoiler section just to talk about some of the Awakened Devil Fruit stuff. But if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. Alrighty, so spoiler section. Again, these are going to be mostly just unscripted ramblings, but I wanted to mention and talk about the whole subject of the Awakened Devil Fruits. And yeah, it's often like, at least for me, I always forget that awakened fruits were actually mentioned this far back before they were actually even a thing, because awakened devil fruits don't even really come up as a thing really until Dressrosa, all the way in the post-time skip era, where we see it actually being prominently used by something other than a mindless zone type. And we see that with Doflamingo and his awakened devil fruit. And yeah, upon the revelation of the fact that yes, Paramecias can now be awakened, it was pretty crazy. And seeing how Doflamingo used his fruit not only to create clones of himself, but to actually transform his surrounding environment actually into strings as well, which is insane. And yeah, he used it to great effect. And seeing what the power of an awakened Paramecia fruit, it was pretty crazy to see, and it really gets your mind going, like, what else could people do with their awakened fruits? And yeah, we see that one thing with the Paramecias is that they have the ability to not only turn themselves into whatever that properties that they have their fruit with, they can actually induce things around them to transform. Like Doflamingo could change like the ground and the buildings into strings as well that he can then control. And then of course we see Katakuri with his awakened devil fruit, and seeing how he can do that with Mochi and use Mochi and turn everything that he can surround him with Mochi as well. And that was really cool to see. And I think, yeah, right now there's still very few awakened devil fruits, but then once we got to Wano, we obviously got 3 more of the big ones awakened. Of course, we saw Kid with his Jiki Jiki no Mi awakened devil fruit, where he can magnetize other things and other people. And then seeing Law's Ope Ope no Mi, like his that devil fruit awakened is so crazy. And when he does the whole croom thing, and he can now basically coat other stuff in the croom, it's so crazy that fruit, how that works. And then of course the big one with Luffy awakening his Gomu Gomu no Mi or his Hito Hito no Mi, and basically unlocking Gear 5th and unleashing Nika and Joy Boy. And yeah, of course Luffy is a zone type, as we found out, so his is just a zone awakening. But it's interesting now that we see an awakened zone, and then later on in Egghead Island we also see Kaku and Lucci awaken their fruits, and they're both zones, and we see this sort of like cloud scarf around them. Now Kaku and Lucci have this black scarf, while Luffy has these white scarves. It's very interesting what the difference is, and it's still not very clear how those awakenings differ from the awakenings that we see here in the demon beasts that are patrolling Impel Down, because they're clearly to have been zone awakenings, but I'm not sure if they're like incomplete awakenings or just like not the user themselves aren't trained well enough to be able to use the awakening, so they let the zone sort of fruit overtake their mind, because it is well established by now that zone fruits have sort of a will of their own and maybe even be sentient. Like the Gorose like imply that the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika was actually kind of sentient and like actually avoiding them, and maybe even seeked out Luffy. So maybe if you're not strong enough to awaken a zone fruit, the zone fruit will actually overtake you and turn you into this sort of mindless beast. Maybe that's what's happening. I don't know, but the whole awakening thing is very interesting, because it opens up so many more avenues for different techniques, different fights, different dynamics between characters. And we still haven't seen an awakened Logia fruit. And I can't even imagine what that would be like, because Logia fruits are already crazy strong as they are. How much stronger could they possibly be, and what could that even look like? Because it's not going to be like Paramecia, where they turn the environment around them into their element, because they already can do that. Basically, they can basically turn things into their elements. I guess Kizaru with his Pika Pika no Mi, like he can't necessarily turn the ground into light or something like that, but I mean, you have all these other elemental stuff. I mean, even ones as strong as Aokiji Hiei no Mi, obviously he can turn everything into ice around him. But even people like Caribou with the Numa Numa no Mi, or the Swamp fruit, he can basically turn anything around him into swamps. So I think, yeah, with the Logia fruits, it'll be interesting to see what actually awakening them means. Maybe they just get stronger, or the fact maybe they can even get strong enough to the point where Haki doesn't become an issue again. I don't know. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that's actually handled, or whether that even will come up. I mean, I guess it has to. You introduce something like awakened devil fruits, you gotta awaken a Logia fruit and see how that happens. And who knows, maybe that might be what Blackbeard does. Maybe he'll be the first one to awaken his Yami Yami no Mi and see how an awakened version of that fruit, my god, that would probably be pretty terrifying to fight against. But yeah, I don't know what that would really entail, to be honest. my imagination is just not good enough to even come up with anything. But anyways, that's kind of all I wanted to talk about in this spoiler section. So yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll see you later. See ya.